The 7th may not be too well known on these shores, but as a former ATP Player Council president and board member he has a unique insight into the murky world of tennis politics. Arguably more than ever before, this season has seen the activities of those who typically move behind the scenes thrust into the spotlight. From the much criticized, and now reversed, International Tennis Federation's ITF World Tennis Tour to the power-hubbing moves on the ATP Tour to Justin Gimelstob's no-contest plea for felony battery charges, off-court drama has often dominated the headlines ahead of the action between the white lines. Tennis, Mayotte believes, is a mess. A mess he was hoping to play his part in cleaning up. The 58-year-old thrust his hat into the ring for Gimelstob's vacant position on the ATP board. Unfortunately, from his perspective at least, he was not invited to present to the Player Council in Rome last week. Advertisement. I was obviously following what was going on with Justin Gimelstob really over the last couple of years, he tells metro.co.uk. I had some concerns about some of his actions outside of the realm of being a board member, and then obviously my antenna really went up during the incident that turned out to be an assault. Gimelstob stepped down from his role on the ATP board. Picture, Getty Images. I was told at that point that he had run unopposed the last 2 times and that was the case going forward, and it was at that point I started to think about seriously running, first as a protest candidate because I didn't hear anyone else was stepping up, but then as I started getting into it a little bit more, I started to get interested in the position. My background as former ATP Council president and board member put me in a good position to run for the spot. I think the biggest thing is I needed to be a part of this lobbying process for a much longer time. That is the biggest reason I didn't get the role. I needed to get the players to understand my history, knowledge, and how my history in the politics could help bring perspective on these issues. I think that's the most important thing. I know there were very strong people under consideration, but I thought Brad Gilbert, Andy Murray's former coach, who was also not invited to present to the council, and I had better resumes than a couple of people who were chosen. I think they were just better known to a certain extent. Advertisement. Mayotte publicly let his feelings known shortly after the 6-man shortlist had been revealed, taking to Twitter to express his disappointment in a tweet that tagged World No. 1 and Player Council President Novak Djokovic before going on to claim the process stinks. At Jokonol at ATP_Tour at Christoph Clary at Steph Milestone is very confused, disappointed that myself and other qualified candidates not allowed to present to council in Rome for election. Those concerned about direction of sport should ask why. At BG Tennis Nation at Stan Wawrinka, Tim Mayotte, May 9, 2019. He has no regrets in telling the tennis world exactly how he felt and is keen to keep knocking on the door in order to seriously challenge the increasingly concerning status quo in the sport. The tweets were less frustration, more just desire to get into the dialogue. He sighs. I know people want to get more money, but I want the players to think what it looks like from the outside. This, particularly with Gimelstob but also with the sport in general, is a mess. These conflicts are undercutting the credibility of the sport. It's difficult when you're in a bubble as a player to understand those things have an impact. It stinks came out of something of a miscommunication. Regardless, it stinks holds for the conflicts. The fact that Gimelstob and his company is producing video content for the ATP is a conflict. We've got deep conflicts. We have tournament directors representing players. This makes for just such a muddle. There's not an effective governance there. Advertisement. My goal was to get out in public what I would have said to the Player Council. This conflict has got to stop. These conflicts of interest. Tackling the deep-rooted conflicts of interest in tennis was at the top of Mayotte's 4-point manifesto, along with getting more money from the slams, funneling more money to the lower-ranked players and making the board member role a full-time position, and he wanted a new law introduced in order to stop such conflicts arising. Tim Mayotte fact file, aged 58, nationality, American, career high ranking, 7 best Grand Slam results, Australian Open semi-finals 1983, Olympics, silver medalist in Seoul 1988. I wish somebody back then had stepped up and said something about conflicts, he said of his own time representing the ATP's interests. I was back then doing broadcasting. I wasn't as involved as Justin was, but somebody has to stand up from the perspective of being in the seat that this is wrong. The conflicts are the same. There are healthy conflicts between the top player and the bottom player, and tournaments versus players. Those are natural conflicts. But you've got to get rid of these other avoidable conflicts if we're really going to move forward. Tennis is systemically compromised because of the positions of players and tournament directors taking multiple fields. That's gotta end. Well, Evans was thought to have 5 of the player council votes in the bag heading into the presentations, but unusually, the 10-man council was deadlocked, with Nicholas Lipenti and Evans now in a battle to take one of the 3 player representative spots on the board during Wimbledon. Well, Evans, right, was the favorite to get the role. Picture, Getty. I certainly was surprised that it came out a split vote, Mayotte says. My understanding, which makes sense to me, was that well, Evans has been communicating with Stob and therefore Djokovic for a long period of time. Whether that's the case or not, that's hearsay, but I was also excited to hear Lipenti came through with half the votes. Advertisement. I heard that Weller was going to be the choice, so I was excited to hear the players were open. My understanding is right now that there's a real divide in the council, and some folks want to really proceed with a much more aggressive stance, like Djokovic over the last year and a half, firing Chris Kermode and bringing in a new CEO, and then another group that is against that in a much more conciliatory approach towards the current structure. I was happy to hear the other voting bloc stood up and dug deeper. When I was in the council and the board, we never had any deadlocks like this. It speaks to the stakes. What's curious to me is how much the other top guys, and if they're at all in the background, saying we're going to stand against this platform that Stob and Djokovic have had and try and find a different path going forwards. I'm sure there's tons and tons of exciting and delicious details going on as people are trying to position themselves, but the big question mark to me is where are the other top guys? Ecuador's Nicholas Lipenti is in contention for the post. Picture, Getty Images. Asked for his preference on the candidates, he replies, it's hard to tell. I don't know what Weller is calling for. I would hope that he's a friend and a very effective manager on the tour and as vice president when I was there. My biggest concern is that someone is willing to stand up and fight against the conflicts. Also that the council and board start to understand that you can't have people who are willing to. He pauses for thought. You can't sit on the sidelines and have people who are bringing a bad name to this sport to be in it in the highest position. It seems to me that Stob was the second most powerful, well maybe even the first given his relationship with Djokovic and then getting Kermode fired. He was maybe the most important person in the ATP, and yet here he is conflicted and engaging in criminal activities. Djokovic hit out at criticism flung in his direction during the Italian Open. The way it was presented in the media, I didn't really like it, and I don't think it's fair that you guys point at myself as the decision maker, the reigning Wimbledon champion complained. I am the president of council, but it consists of 10 players, so the majority decides. I am one of the 10. Djokovic bemoaned being framed as the villain of the piece. Picture, Socrates. Getty. However, Mayotte believes he has to stand up and be counted for his role in proceedings. From my perspective, he deserves it, the American says. He would take praise for any credit for any good things that would happen. There seems to be no question, at least as far as the information that I have, that he took a very strong stance about where he thought the tour should go, and he put together a coalition to make sure that would happen. He should have made sure he was comfortable in the fact he was making those decisions. You can fault the guy, I do fault him, but I do also applaud him because he stepped up and tried to make things happen. So of course you can give him criticism just as you would give him credit if he increases the amount of money for the players. Mayotte may not agree entirely with the 15-time Grand Slam champion's methods, but he appreciates the manner in which he has become politically active and supports his challenge of the ATP structure as a whole. One of the things I was going to call for from a player's perspective was a thorough review of the bylaws, he adds. The players have a direct connection to the slams and the process of the futures and challenges that players try to make it up. Those connections are inherently much stronger with the players than they are with the tournament directors. Mayotte during his run to the Olympics final. Picture, professional sport, pop a photo, Getty Images. The players have to have a stronger voice in negotiating what they want in those two parties. The tournament directors are much more just a limited position. You have to look at the bylaws and figure out if it's possible to have a strong player representation with the slams and with the ITF to get the voice heard within the current structure, or if you just have to change the whole thing. I think what Novak is right about, and what I applaud him for, is he realizes the players need stronger representation vis-a-vis the slams. I don't think he's as concerned about the ITF, but what's clear is the ITF completely botched up this transition tour. Since our half-an-hour phone conversation, the ITF has scrapped the widely criticized World Tennis Tour, a failed venture that Mayotte had plenty to say on, which is at least one step forward in the right direction. Plenty of issues do remain, however, and Mayotte is keen to hammer home one of the key points of his sadly unappreciated manifesto. I want to make this point one more time, he concludes. This is why board reps need to be full-time. Because the issues at this point are so big. The players are in a bubble. Their only goal, on the whole, is to go out and play tennis matches. It's draining and difficult, so the board reps need to be full-time, at least for the next couple of years, but I think forever, to communicate with all the parties, crystallize what the issues are, and then get tennis on a better foot. More tennis advertisement. Let's block ads. Why?